Well, Jim, our next question, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. It's one of those questions I mentioned at the top. It could happen to you.
It could happen to me.
Jim, a lot of questions are sent in and then people get mad. You may see some feedback. Brian never asks my question. I've been sending it in for years. It never gets on the air. There are various reasons why questions don't get on the air, but right now we're going to go through just some random questions, and we'll see why these haven't got on the air so far.
Okay, well, we'll just, as we hear them, then we will evaluate whether or not that we should put them on the show or not.
Now, I remind everyone, and I remind you, we have a lot of new listeners. A lot of people discover the show each and every week, and they dive in, so they may not know your entire history. A lot of people are just discovering you, let alone the show. So
I have been shocked by that. I thought as long as I've been around that pretty much everybody had come to find me by now, but I still hear this.
Well, this question, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jeff in Michigan. I recently learned that Jeff Jarrett's grandmother was a wrestling promoter starting in the late 1940s. Being the historian that you are, Jim, I was wondering if you had any stories about Christine Jarrett.
Well, how many of the clips on YouTube, on our award-winning YouTube channel, do you think involve Christine Jarrett at this point? How many hundreds would...
I don't know. And actually, I don't know if you've ever actually just explained her story, how she became... I mean, what? On one hand, who are the most powerful women in the history of the wrestling business?
Well, maybe I didn't do it chronologically, I guess. We've always just assumed that everybody knew and we would talk about stories, but she started in, oh my God, I'm going to say 1946-ish, 47-ish, as selling tickets. Back in those days, Nick Goulas and Roy Welch, a lot of wrestling promotions in those days had offices at various downtown hotels. You'll see that even carried on in New York until, the 70s, early 80s. They kept that office at the Holland Hotel and before Madison Square Garden. John Arezzi talked about it. You'd have to go and get your press pass and everything. And all, Gorilla Monsoon and Arnie Skoland, all those guys would be sitting around, and Arnie smoking a cigar, whatever. It was like a fucking 40s wrestling office. And the old boxing movies, same thing. They would have a suite of the rooms that they would use for the wrestling office, and they'd conduct business out of there. And especially it was in Nashville, since Nick and Roy operated the booking office there, where they booked talent all out across to the different promoters in several states. Well, at first, Teenie, Christine Jarrett, Jerry's father had been, it was in World War II. I can't remember what branch of the service. But then they had split up, she and his father. And so she took I believe it was a second job, selling the tickets, because one of their ticket outlets downtown also, whether it be the wrestling office or whatever, was a shoe store. And so she was in the thing is, wrestling, think about this. They ran every week at the Hippodrome downtown, drew 3,000-4,000 people a week every week. There was no ticket master. If you wanted to get advance tickets, you either went to the wrestling office or went to the shoe store, or went to the other place, or you got them at the ticket window that night, an hour before the matches. So this was a steady business that the promoters had, selling tickets out of these ticket outlets. Well, she was so efficient and, good at it that gradually they gave her a job in the office itself, working for Nick and Roy. There was another secretary there named Nina Bond that they played a lot of tricks on her, the old X-Lax, chocolates and things. And she's the one, Nina was, that Sam Bass and Roy Welch played the rib on when fucking Sam Bass went in to complain about his payoff and the door was closed. She heard the gunshot. She runs in and Roy Welch made her fucking help take Sam Bass's body down and dump it in the dumpster out behind the hotel. They went down the service entrance and then went back up the same way. But Sam Bass jumped out of the dumpster and ran around front and was sitting in the fucking chair when she walked back in the office, still playing dead. Anyway, it was fun back in those days hanging around the wrestling offices. So And Teenie started working in the office and ended up doing, a variety of the bookkeeping and ticket sales. And she for years worked in the ticket office every night that the matches in Nashville ran. And of course, when Jerry was born in a couple years before she got the job even selling wrestling tickets. But as he got older, by the early 50s, he's 7 or 8 years old, and he's running around the Hippodrome selling the 5 and 10 cent wrestling programs. And so while she's working in the office and doing paperwork and tickets and all the things you do in a wrestling office, Jerry would go to the matches and would see the Fargos and see Luthez and all that stuff. And that's where he got, the mind for it. So when Roy Welch decided to put Jerry in charge of booking Memphis in 67 or 68, he was only like 23, 24 years old, which that was unheard of in those days. But you can kind of tell by the way that the business flourished right after that. They had been doing things in Memphis the old way from back in the 40s for the same way. And he kind of jazzed things up, different kind of matches, new booking. He brought some of the heroes like Jackie Fargo and Al Green back, but he got new guys in like Jerry Lawler and Jim White, blah, blah, blah. While he's doing that, at the same time, once he started booking Memphis, he wanted to, because he was smart enough to know, and his mother worked in the office for years, and Christine Jarrett was very careful with a penny, and she would squeeze a nickel until the buffalo farted. So she passed that on to Jerry Jarrett, and he was looking for towns to open up and run as a promoter. He knew that's where the money was. So when finally he found that he had been advised that the only really stretch of dark towns at that point in time, anywhere around the territory, on any adjoining end, was Evansville, Indiana, Louisville, Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. We've mentioned that before. Bruiser had stopped running Louisville and Evansville, and there'd been no live wrestling for several years. So when he finally was able to come up here and get television, he made his mother partners with him in Louisville Wrestling Enterprises. And at that point, that was 1970. So before Ann Gunkel, and I know the young rock folks might have a problem with this, but before Lee Maivia, because this was before Peter Maivia even died or even was a promoter himself and owned the territory in Hawaii, before anybody really but Eileen Eaton, Christine Jarrett was the co-promoter of several regular weekly towns as part of the Big Gulas Welch territory. And of course, then they both got kind of, she still kept the job working in Nick and Roy's office. But in addition to those duties, she would go to Louisville every Tuesday night and Evansville every Wednesday night. And in the early years, they were off and on in Lexington, depending on the TV or whatever. So she was on the road 2 and 3 days a week, and then she promoted spot shows off of those televisions. So in addition to the office job, and she did a lot of work out of her house, and she was on the road 2 or 3 days a week, and that was for a number of years until finally, Jerry split off, and then that's another thing. We've told that story before, and it kind of affected Teenie also. Nick Gulas had said, "Yeah, boy, if you get TV in those towns, you open them up. You get the talent from us and pay it as a 10% booking fee," because he didn't think that Jerry could make the towns go. So he was just going to book guys out to him for the 10% fee. But when he found out what the business Louisville started doing after the first 2 or 3 months, that's when he told Jerry, "Well, we're partners." So all of a sudden, instead of 100% of Louisville Wrestling Enterprises between Jerry and Christine, they had 50 because the office in Nashville had 50. And that was the first 7 years till he got rid of his unwanted partner. And then they were kicking in 10% to Bruiser and Snyder, who got mad when Louisville started doing big business. But yeah, I would say I know that there's the longevity factor with Eileen Eaton in Los Angeles, even though she had various other people in the office helping her. But when you talk about just towns that she was specifically responsible for, I would say between 1970 and she finally got mostly off the road and stopped going to Louisville and anything but Nashville probably in early 90s. So for a 20-year period, Christine Jarrett was actually the promoter of, ran more pro wrestling events than not only any woman in the country at that time, probably almost any time period, and probably more because there's at least 3 shows a week for 20 years. So probably more than most men. And she never booked anything. She was not a booker because people get that confused. She handled all of the relations with the television stations and the contracts with the TV station, the contracts with the building, the dealings with the State Athletic Commission in Indiana and in Kentucky. They had one in Indiana back in those days. All the ticketing, the sponsors for the spot shows, the booster groups, the football field or the football team over at the high school that's having the spot show to raise money for new uniforms. She's sending them the tickets. She's sending them the posters. She delivered the TV tapes back when you did that kind of thing to the TV station. Every week when she came into town, her first stop was at the TV station, pick up last week's tapes and give them this week's tape. Then she'd go to the building. Then she'd check up at the box office to make sure that the advance was counted and that everything was accounted for, while whoever her driver was, maybe Pat Malone's wife or her niece Donna or whoever, would open up the merchandise stand and get that all set out. And then she'd go back in the back and check all the guys in, made sure they had a license so she could send in the report to the commission. She was there till the end of the show because then you had to check up afterwards. And then she would call in, make sure that Jerry knew what the house was. And, of course, all the cash would go with an Eddie Marlin or a Bill Dundee or somebody that was going to be considerably more difficult to relieve of that briefcase than Christine might have been if she stopped on the side of the road at night. But, I mean, that was 3 or 4 towns a week for 20 years. It was insane, the amount of just paperwork and details that she was able to keep up with. And then you talk about placing advertising. In the smaller towns, they'd still do newspaper. Here, they still did newspaper. In Louisville and the smaller towns, they did posters and getting all that stuff printed and getting the cards from whoever was booking and making sure all that was done. It was insane.
There have been various women in high-profile roles in wrestling in recent years. Stephanie McMahon, Dixie Carter. Obviously, you mentioned Eileen Eaton and Gunkel. Do you think there's ever been a woman who understood the inner workings of a promotion and had to, from A to Z make things happen like Christine Jarrett?
No, because nobody had that much experience. She had, like I said, for 25 years before the 20 years that I just mentioned that she actively was a licensed promoter, she worked inside the office of one of the biggest booking offices in the country. They ran 3 towns a night minimum in that whole territory during the 50s, 60s glory period. So 20 shows a week. She saw everybody come through. She's the one that, remember, Jack Pfeffer memorialized it on one of the postcards that's still in the Pfeffer collection in Notre Dame when he wrote, "This was the night Christine Jarrett threatened, Treate, and threatened to kill me." Because he was trying to pull his shit. She always, every time that she would talk with disdain about somebody, she would compare them to Jack Pfeffer. I'm talking to her, this was in the 60s. I'm talking to her in the late 70s, and she, very Jack Pfefferish. Or like there was this one outlaw guy that ran outlaw shows, and there was only one back then. You only had one outlaw promotion at a time. A guy named Don Pruitt that would run shows in Kentucky using outlaw guys. And he had refereed for Nick and Roy years before, but got on the outs with him or whatever. And she'd had some kind of Don Pruitt outfit. But no, she had seen every major name come in and out. She had seen every kind of promotional war. She was there when in the office, they were already running Nashville and Chattanooga. When she started, she was there when they bought Birmingham from Joe Gunther in 1953 because Nick always wanted to run his hometown. And she was there when Roy Welch and Buddy Fuller annexed Memphis. And led to that whole thing. So she got to see all that. And it was 2 different territories, but she was in the middle of it because she was handling paperwork for everything. So while Sputnik Monroe and Billy Wicks are doing all this business and Roy Welch's pet town down in Memphis, Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown or whoever the fuck are selling out Birmingham, and she's getting all the reports. So she, had just more experience than almost anybody, man or woman, ever had in wrestling.
I have a bunch of programs from 59 in Memphis, and they have her handwriting at the very top center of the first page of each program, and it says attendance, and then she writes in what the attendance was for that week.
Where did you get those from, you no good bastard?
I just happened to get those.
And her handwriting was very distinctive. Very neat and cursive, right?
That's right.
And
like yours. Yours is very neat and cursive.
Well, but hers was very more neat and cursive, even though she didn't curse. One of the greatest souvenirs I have is she paid me for pictures one time, and this was before Jarrett and Goulas split off. So she was taking the money back to the Goulas office, right? Because that's where it all got split. But she paid me in cash out of the house, and I still have the $100 bill money wrapper where in her handwriting she had written Nick Goulas on a $100 bill, $100 wrapper. And that was it. But that's the thing is that almost anything that came out of that office for years was touched by Christine Jarrett. What was the attendance on some of those?
Some of those, I mean, I don't have them in front of me, but you would see like 7,800. And you're thinking like, wow, 1959 Memphis, that's pretty impressive.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. Thank you for telling me about this just out in front of God and everybody in public on the air, because us particular Memphis historians have been trying to track down for a while exactly what the seating capacity was of the Ellis Auditorium when they had it all the way opened up. And 8,000 has been an estimate, and it's nice to know that we were probably about right.
Hold on, I actually just dug up a pile of these.
All right, now I've just got you going, right?
So July 27th, 59, which is Sputnik Monroe against Spider Galento in the main event.
That's Al Spider Galento to you.
That's right. 7,800 people.
Yeah.
And then June 29th, 59, Sputnik and Billy Wicks. Now, I believe this may be outdoors, actually. But attendance is 8,000.
Well, hold on one second. I'll be getting a book while you're reading those. Go ahead.
Trying to see if there's any other ones in this pile I picked up that have the attendance figure at the top, and it doesn't appear they do. But there it is, a couple of attendance figures.
Hold on, I'm trying to find the right book. My daggum, where'd my books go? Where'd my daggum books go?
What an episode this has been so far, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, for heaven's sake, you know it is, brother. If Jace just wants to make here we go, the 1950s. What'd you say, July? One of your dates was July 1659?
July 27th, 59, and June
July
29th.
27th, okay. That was at the Ellis Auditorium, the main event, Sputnik Monroe against Al Spider Galento, also Billy Wicks against Treacherous Phillips, Tom Drake, who would later go on to serve in the Alabama State Legislature, against the Mighty Yankee, and Red Roberts, one of the top heels in Tennessee history, against Rocky Colombo.
Well,
and then, go ahead.
I was going to say, in Christine Jarrett's red ink, cursive, attendance, 7,800.
Yes. So then they had a show on August 3rd. That was the first Russwood Park outdoor show with Billy Wicks and Sputnik Monroe, and they drew 10,157 according to the newspaper report.
I got that program right here.
Okay. Then they came back on August 10th, and it was Sputnik Monroe against Jesse James for the Southern Junior Heavyweight title, and Billy Wicks and Tretch Phillips, and there's no attendance listed. And that's when you've got August 17th, right?
I'm missing August 10th, but I have the big one from August 17th, yeah.
Okay, August 17th was Russwood Park, the rematch, Sputnik Monroe, Billy Wicks, Rocky Marciano refereed, and that was the newspaper listed 13,749 paying customers by legend and also newspaper reports and by Buddy Wayne's eyewitness testimony. When they couldn't get anybody else in the park and they locked the gate, the people busted down the outfield fence, and approximately 3,000 or so that were milling around outside were able to get in. So they believe that by the time that Monroe and Wicks got in and there is some kind of brief 8mm film of just a bit of this, and there's just a few pictures, but there was like,
I didn't know there was film. I never heard that before.
Well, I don't know if it was film. There's film of one of these outdoor shows, just a clip that I've seen of the atmosphere and Sputnik going to the ring on an outdoor show. Don't even know if it was this night, but there are definitely pictures. But the point is, the people there was like 17,000 people in a stadium that sold out at 13.5 or whatever, and it's still to this day, when you take into account everything in total, the most people that ever saw a wrestling match in the city of Memphis, Tennessee, because the WWF never did a pay-per-view in the big building without the stage. What was the Pyramid at the time, without the stage and everything? They never did 17,000 people. They couldn't get that in the Mid-South Coliseum, and Jerry Jarrett never ran a major outdoor event to try to break that record. So it's after 62 years, it pretty much still stands. That's how hot they were in 59. And then they went outdoors again, as a matter of fact. Hold on here, because after the big match on August 13th, hold on, I'm finding it, or August 17th, rather, they went back to the Ellis Auditorium for Sputnik Monroe and Spider Galento the following week, and then Sputnik and Jesse James the following week, and then Sputnik and Spider Galento the following week, and Sputnik and Spider Galento the following week, where the paid attendance was announced at 7128, and then they went back outdoors for Sputnik Monroe and Billy Wicks again on September 21st. And there's no attendance listed, but one would imagine it was in the 8,000 to 10,000 range.
And then I got the program for a week later, Sputnik versus the Mighty Yankee, September 28th, 59. Promoter offers $50 reward for bottle throwers. Promoter Buddy Fuller said recently he would pay anyone $50 who will identify anyone throwing a bottle or dangerous object towards the ring. He says he intends to stop the bottle throwing, even if it means someone going to jail, as the fans around the ringside must be protected against such danger. Many plainclothes officers will be stationed throughout the balcony to positively identify those persons throwing objects. They will be taken to jail, where they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No bottle throwing.
By gum. And do you know what happened on October 12th? You've heard this story. If I told this story recently, you mentioned we have new listeners.
You talking about Sputnik at the fair?
Well, Sputnik at the main event on October 12th, 1959, that was advertised for the Ellis Auditorium, Sputnik Monroe versus Kid Marley. You're about to say who?
Well, you've talked about this on the air, so I know who Kid Marley is. But
okay,
who?
Well, then we won't tell that story again. But basically, we're skipping over the entire story, which is available on our YouTube somewhere. The Sputnik and some fucking cowboy at the rodeo at the fair got in a fight, and Sputnik ended up on the front page of the newspaper in Memphis with a big black eye and a cut cheek, where the cowboy had fucking punched him in the face when Sputnik had gone to try to fight Gene Barry, who was Bat Masterson, appearing at the Memphis Fair. Anyway, basically, when they got that publicity, you would imagine, wrestling promoter Buddy Fuller got the credit for it. You would imagine either Roy Welch or Buddy Fuller, one of the others, said, well, we got something here. And since Sputnik blamed him getting knocked out on either slipping in cow shit or what, he caught him, he sucker punched him, he wasn't looking. So they announced on television that, as a matter of fact, I'll read it. Wrestling promoter Buddy Fuller insisted yesterday that Kid Marley, a 202-pound cowboy from Paris, Tennessee, will appear on tomorrow night's Matt card at the auditorium. In fact, he has officially announced that Marley, who got a barrel of publicity for himself and Sputnik Monroe during the Mid-South Fair, will appear. They offered this guy $1,500 in 1959. What would that be? That's 10 grand easily, right? Today.
I would think, yeah.
They went on TV, Sputnik challenged him, and Buddy Fuller came out, and the promoter said, we'll give him $1,500 if he shows up and gets in the ring in the main event at the Ellis Auditorium against Sputnik. And this was from Buddy Wayne, who was around at the time. The guy didn't show up because he sent word, fuck you. At first, they had actually talked to him once, I think. As a matter of fact, he turned down $1,000. That's what in another one of these articles, it says he turned down $1,000. But then they offered $1,500 and he just didn't show up. And he sent word. He said, I know you guys are trying to sucker, which they probably were. You guys are trying to sucker me in there and Sputnik Monroe's going to kill me, which whether Sputnik could or couldn't have, he probably wouldn't have got out of the Ellis Auditorium in good shape. But anyway, they had a fucking huge amount of publicity for this. So when the real cowboy didn't show up, they brought somebody else in there and named him Jimmy Jones and said he was from the Cowboys' hometown, and Sputnik beat him up. I love wrestling.
Well, on that topic, let me conclude our Christine Jarrett portion of the show here by asking you, because you got to know her a different way than most people did, your mother became close friends with her.
Yes. You
guys were, I don't know if you put it this way, but you guys were often on the road with Christine Jarrett, going to these shows. Did she enjoy it? I mean, was it, this is work, so I'm doing it? Was it eventually, this is my family business, I don't mind it? Or was it actually, I enjoy what I do?
No, she enjoyed it. She didn't enjoy certain parts of it like we all do. Not wanting to deal with Elmer Fudd, the Kentucky State Athletic Commissioner, or, whatever. But no, she was never grumpy about the normal things about her job. Coming to, she was always friendly, always hello, welcoming everybody, saying hello to the boys when they came in. That was her weekly routine. She never drove a car. So she always had a driver, but like I said, whether it was Sammy Malone, Pat Malone's wife, or we got to do a show about Pat Malone sometime, the Green Shadow, but or whether it was her niece Donna, or whoever. Sometimes Mike Duncan, her nephew, would ring announce. He did TV for him in the 70s, did some of the ring announcing in Louisville in the 80s. He'd come up, whatever. But her normal routine, she was always very efficient, pleasant, energetic. When I think back at what her age was then and how much energy she had, I'm like, geez, I don't know how in the world she did it. But it was definitely the family business. She was very protective of not only their business. That's probably where I got my disdain for the Outlaws, because that's the first place I heard the term. But her point was correct. These fly-by-night, low-level, outlaw local things that would pop up from time to time damaged the reputation of her business with newspapers or school sponsors or television stations or whatever. And she'd been there for 30-something years, and she'd seen that happen. And it's the same thing. Every time you get somebody, that thinks they can get in the business and do this, you invariably have that outlaw kind of behavior that runs people off from. She wanted her business to be, even though people might not like wrestling at the TV station or at the radio station or the newspaper, they might not like it, but they need to be respectful of it, because she was respectful of theirs. Like at Channel 11, when WHAS was the biggest newscast here in town, late 70s, they showed the footage of her not allowing them to come in the building. They had come and done a story on wrestling a year or two beforehand for the 6 o'clock news, and they had, well, it's obviously fake, and they kind of made halfway fun of the fans and the people who came, and it was not a flattering piece. So a year or two later, the people at the Gardens, Buzz Teeny, hey, Miss Jarrett, TV News is here. and she goes out front, and they're standing there. I can't remember what the sportscaster's name was now. God damn it. It's been 40 years. But anyway, and the camera guy and the audio guy, I'm watching this, right? And they were just amazed that she didn't want them to come in her building, that they had to get clearance. And she said, "You're not welcome here." And you should have seen the look on her face. I said, well, we're going to give you publicity. And she said, "The last time that you came here, you put on the 6 o'clock news that my business was phony and that my people, the fans that come and buy tickets from me, were not the best kind of people, and we don't need your kind of publicity. You look in there, you see what we've got in there, 4,000 people. Why do we need your kind of publicity? You're not allowed in here. Please turn around and leave." Hey, kick the TV news out. I'm like, yeah. And they showed that. They showed themselves, well, we tried to cover the wrestling matches and got snide about it, right? But fucking A, she would never curse. She would never yell or raise her voice. But when she looked you in the eye, especially when she gave you the grip, we've talked about the grip, one thumb on one cheek and the middle finger of the on the other cheek, and pucker your mouth up a little bit and get right in front of you and say, "You listen to me, so-and-so." That's all she needed.
Well, Jim, perhaps somewhere listening to this segment is Jeff Jarrett, WWE Hall of Famer. Speaking of former Impact champions, at one point he was a champion over there, whatever it was called. But maybe he's hearing this and thinking, I wish I had in my office a frame featuring tons and tons of photos of my grandmother, who I love so much.
Well, I can fix him up, because if you have a beloved grandmother, a beloved granddaughter, a beloved grand anything, if you love anybody that you want a picture of, even if you don't love them, but you want a picture of them to remind yourself of what they look like so you don't let them on your property, whatever, the folks at Skylight Frames can fix you up. We've been talking about them here on the program, the gorgeous 10-inch touchscreen on the designer, beautiful looking Skylight frame that sets up almost effortlessly and looks like a real photo frame, but instead has a veritable plethora, a cornucopia, a slideshow of pictures that you can send. You can preload them on the frame and then give them the frame to somebody, or you can give somebody the frame and then you can send them the pictures remotely, however it works. For Mother's Day coming up, surprise mom with pictures of the whole family. She opens up the box, she turns the thing on, and boom, the whole family is right there sliding across her screen. Just go to skylightframe.com. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME, skylightframe.com, first of all, to look at what I'm talking about. They're amazing. And then if you go to skylightframe.com and enter the code DRIVE, DRIVE, you'll get $10 off your purchase of a Skylight frame. Have we mentioned the phrase Skylight frame? That's all you need to know about it. So whether it's your family, your friends, your pets, candid photography, whatever the case may be, if you want to give somebody a frame that you can then stick pictures in at all hours of the day and night from thousands of miles away if necessary, boy, this is a miracle of modern technology.
Skylight frames.
How many do you have now? How many do you have now of these things? Various, because I know you got one in every room with all the pictures of you at various stages of your life.
And the Mets.
So that you can reflect on yourself from time to time. But do you have more for other people in the family?
There are 2 right now in Last Manor. There is one right now residing in Last Manor South, which is what I will call my father's house right now. And those are the only ones right now that I know of in the Last family. However, I have talked so glowingly about Skylight Frames that I'm sure one of the many, many family members must have also purchased this.
That's true. And I'm sorry to hear your dad's gone south.
Yeah, me too. Makes 2 of us. Florida. Ugh.
I thought you meant South New Jersey.
God, no. I would not wish that upon him or anyone.
I'll tell you, I'm from South Jersey. That's what that limo driver that got us lost at the Great American Bash 86 in Washington, D.C. Me, Bobby Eaton, Dennis Condrey, and the Barbarian in a stretch limo with apparently who looked like a fucking Guido from the Jersey Shore driving it. And every time he's asking for directions, hey, I don't know where I'm going. I'm from South Jersey.